I never imagined I'd be frozen at the edge of a community pool, watching helplessly as one of my oldest friends slipped beneath the surface. The morning air had been crisp, bright sunlight dancing across the water, and we were all looking forward to a casual summer get-together. There's something surreal about watching a tragedy unfold just a few yards away, knowing you can't fix it. In that moment, I felt my heart slam against my rib cage like it was trying to rip free. I knew something terrible was happening, but I didn't fully grasp it until it was too late. A week before this horrifying moment, I was in my home office, gazing out at the manicured lawns of Sapphire Oaks, the suburban development where I'd lived for nearly 10 years. The Homeowners Association prided itself on having the best-kept landscaping in the county, an overused marketing phrase they plastered on brochures. Our neighborhood was about as ordinary as it came, dotted with symmetrical houses painted in modest shades of beige, tan, or pale gray. Save for the occasional rebellious homeowner who painted their door bright red, it was a sea of uniform perfection. And that was exactly what our HOA wanted. Among the many rules tucked into the HOA's extensive bylaws was a stipulation about pool aesthetics. They claimed that oversized safety equipment, such as life rings, clashed with the pristine, resort-inspired look. So they removed them. The official reason cited was that a neat row of identical flotation devices somehow cheapened the ambience. Residents who protested were told that all swimmers should be responsible for their own safety. I remember reading that line in a monthly HOA newsletter and feeling an unsettling knot in my stomach. But I wasn't one to stir up trouble. I had a career to maintain, and, truth be told, I'd grown weary of fighting petty bureaucracies. For all of Sapphire Oak's polished veneer, there was always a rumor swirling around about the HOA's questionable decisions. Some folks said the association board did it to cut costs on liability insurance. Others believed they were trying to make the pool area Instagram perfect so they could market the neighborhood to prospective buyers. The real reason might have been a twisted mix of both, but no one knew for sure. One thing was certain. All the bright orange life rings that had once hung from the fence like faithful guardians of swimmers were gone. It was a heavy blow to my friend Wesley. He was in his early 50s, a kind soul who'd never missed a neighborhood meeting. An ex-Air Force mechanic, Wes was a problem solver by nature. He grew up near Lake Michigan, used to diving into cold waters as soon as the ice melted. The man was no stranger to swimming. We first bonded over that shared love for water when we moved into Sapphire Oaks around the same time. Our families would often meet at the pool. Then life got busy, kids off to college, job changes, health issues. The carefree laps we used to enjoy gave way to quick dips and cordial waves. When the HOA removed the life rings, Wesley was one of the few residents who went to the board demanding explanations. He tried to rally neighbors, sent emails, pleaded for community support. "This is a matter of safety," he told me in his deep, calm voice that usually soothed whomever he spoke to. This time, though, I could hear an edge. People can panic in the water for all sorts of reasons, and not everyone is in prime health. He believed strongly that even the most confident swimmers could benefit from a ring tossed to them in moments of unexpected distress. But the HOA board was unmoved. They cited everything from cost savings to minimal usage. One official letter read like a carefully crafted PR statement. "While we appreciate community concern, the pool remains a private recreational feature, not a public safety facility. Please swim responsibly." The note ended with a curt reminder of personal liability forms that each resident had signed. Wesley was livid. He ranted in private about how removing those life rings was going to end in disaster. It was as though he had a premonition of what was to come. I remember one quiet Tuesday night. Wesley and I had been sipping iced tea on my back porch, talking about the usual stuff: grown kids, mortgage adjustments, the pinch of inflation. But our conversation kept drifting back to the HOA's baffling decision. We weren't teenage lifeguards. We were middle-aged men with arthritic knees and slower reflexes than we like to admit. "It's not just about you or me," Wesley said. "It's about everyone else who might freeze up or get a cramp. Heck, it could even be one of us. One day we might need that ring." I nodded, reflecting on how we always assumed other people were in control. We placed our safety in the hands of official decisions, believing that the rules were set by responsible folks. But as the nights went by and no change happened, it was hard to ignore the uneasy feeling building within me. It was that heaviness that followed me into the pool area one fateful morning. Never did I think I'd watch the exact scenario Wesley had warned about play out before my eyes. So real, so devastating. The day began with a warm, gentle sunshine. By afternoon, it would be clouded by unimaginable grief. I still can't forget how the water shimmered that morning, looking so innocent under the suburban sun. Little did I know that in a matter of minutes, it would become a silent grave for someone I cared about more than I ever realized. Wesley had invited me to an early swim before the crowd usually rolled in. It wasn't unusual for us to do laps together, especially after he'd complained for weeks about feeling a slight tightness in his chest. "Doctor says it's anxiety," he muttered. "I guess it's everything. My son's job search, the HOA fiasco, and my mother-in-law's dementia." He'd begun swimming as a way to manage stress, to keep his blood pressure in check. From the outside, he seemed physically capable, though maybe not as spry as he'd been at 35. That morning, I had arrived at the pool just after 7. A few dedicated residents were already there. Gail, who always did water aerobics. Mr. and Mrs. Olson, who'd been married nearly 50 years and floated side by side in matching visors. I remember scanning the fence out of habit, looking for that bright orange ring. I'd done it almost subconsciously every time I visited. Of course, it wasn't there. None were. A neat stretch of blank fencing, no hooks, no safety rope. The new normal. Wesley showed up a few minutes later, carrying a small drawstring bag with a water bottle and goggles. He gave me that half smile he always wore when he was deep in thought. "Ready to beat me in a couple of laps?" he teased. We eased into the pool, letting the cool water shock our sleepy bodies. It was quiet, just gentle splashes and the faint hum of pool filters. For a while, things felt refreshing, almost serene. I remember thinking how nice it was to share these moments away from the everyday grind, especially with someone who'd become like a brother to me. Wesley didn't start out strong in the water that day. He did a few strokes, paused, tried again, paused. I asked if he was all right. He nodded and forced a smile, but something about his eyes made me uneasy. They carried a bit of fear, like he was grappling with an inner battle. Knowing him, he wouldn't want to quit. He was stubborn that way, never wanting to admit a limitation, never wanting to appear weak. We drifted toward the shallow end, joking about how out of shape we were, how we used to race across the pool back in our 40s. "We're not that old," I teased, trying to lighten the mood. "We've got plenty of laps left in us." He laughed, but it was hollow, lacking the usual spark. We chatted idly about local gossip, the new bakery rumored to be opening near the neighborhood entrance, and the ongoing frustrations with the HOA. Suddenly, Wesley went silent mid-sentence. His hand clutched at his chest. My heart did a strange flip-flop in my chest at the sight. "Something wrong?" I asked, moving closer. He took a moment before responding. I just have sharp pain," he said quietly. "Probably that anxiety the doc mentioned." I offered to get out of the pool and grab him a drink or take him home. But Wesley shook his head, adamant about finishing at least one more lap. He inhaled, exhaled, and told me he felt slightly better. Deep down, I wished he'd just rest. But Wesley had that unyielding determination, like he had something to prove. To himself, to the world, maybe to the HOA. So he stayed. We pushed away from the wall for one more slow lap, me on his left side, just a couple of feet away. His breathing seemed labored, but I kept telling myself maybe it was just the morning chill or the tension he'd mentioned. We reached the halfway point, where the pool bottom started to slope into the deep end. That was when I noticed his strokes growing uneven, frantic. At first, I thought he was just losing steam, but then he bobbed awkwardly, gasping. A pulse of alarm shot through me. "Wes!" I called. He didn't reply. Suddenly, he went under. My instincts kicked in, and I reached out trying to grab his arm. My fingers brushed against his slippery shoulder, but I lost my grip. Water splashed into my face. I coughed, choking on the chemically tang of chlorine. Time seemed to slow. I caught a glimpse of his eyes wide with panic as he sank. I lunged after him, but Wesley's body jerked away in a fit of sputtering, like a drowning man trying to grasp anything, including me. In those first seconds, I thought I could handle it. I wasn't an untrained teenager, but it's astonishing how a distressed adult can overpower you in water. His flailing arms struck my shoulder. I tried to keep my head above the surface. That's when I realized we were drifting toward deeper water. I shouted for help, my voice echoing off the concrete tiles. Gail and the Olsons looked over, alarmed. Another neighbor ran to the pool's edge. Someone screamed, "Where are the life rings?" And that single question, slicing through the chaos, was a thunderbolt of dread. There were none at all. No rope, no flotation device. My arms felt numb from both panic and strain. A random bystander hurried along the fence, searching in vain for the equipment that had once been there. As Wesley's face slipped beneath the surface again, my mind lurched. This was the real thing, the unimaginable scenario we had all feared but dismissed as unlikely. He was drowning, and without a float to stabilize him, I was all he had. Frantic, I tried again to grab his torso in a rescue hold, but the water churned around us. I got a mouthful of chlorinated water and came up coughing. My heart pounded so violently, it drowned out every sound except Wesley's desperate splashing. I could see neighbors rushing to help, but in those crucial seconds, no one had the right tool to stop the unthinkable. With each second, he sunk a little deeper, and I felt the beginning of something dark, something irreversible, wrapping around our lives. The world around me faded in a muffled chaos. It was as though the entire pool area had shrunk to a frantic circle of water where I struggled to keep Wesley's head above the surface. Every gasp he took was more desperate, every flail weaker. His eyes locked on mine for an instant, pleading, terrified. The sensation of his hand clawing at my arm still haunts me, a cold, paralyzing memory I'll never shake. I tried everything I knew from my teenage days as a junior lifeguard. Proper rescue holds, hooking under his arms, supporting his head, even sliding behind him to keep us both afloat. But Wesley was too panicked, his adrenaline fueling movements that were chaotic and unpredictable. Each time he slipped beneath the surface, a surge of dread gnawed at my gut. We sank momentarily, then I'd kick desperately, flailing to bring us back up. My lungs burned, my arms screamed for relief, but I refused to let go. I heard shouts, "Call 911. Somebody help them." "Where's the ring?" A young woman, maybe in her 30s, ran to the fence, scanning every inch of it for something, anything. A float, a ring, a rope. Nothing. Somebody else tossed in a foam noodle, but it was too short to provide real buoyancy for an adult man. Panic coated the air like a dense fog. Gail, the elderly water aerobics regular, was trembling near the steps, shouting for help but unable to jump in. I could see the heartbreak on her face, the powerlessness. Then, I noticed a tall man, probably a neighbor I didn't know well, sprinting toward us. He jumped into the pool, churning the water around me. Together, we tried to pull Wesley to the shallow end. But Wesley was no longer helping. He was limp, barely responsive, and dangerously close to sinking for good. The neighbor and I locked arms under Wesley's shoulders and kicked with everything we had. We managed to lug him a few feet, but our exhaustion made each stroke a Herculean task. When we finally reached a depth where our feet touched the bottom, another resident stepped into the water to grab Wesley's legs. We hoisted him out of the pool onto the hot concrete. As soon as Wesley's back hit the ground, I heard someone wail. It might have been me. The color had drained from Wesley's face, and his eyes were shut. Water dribbled from the corner of his mouth. The neighbor who helped me, Steve or Stan, I never caught his name, immediately began CPR. I dropped to my knees, adrenaline pulsing in my ears. I'd learned CPR decades ago, but my mind was so blank with terror that all I could do was watch, trembling. I couldn't get my arms to move in the steady, practiced rhythm I'd been taught. Another minute felt like an hour. Sirens wailed in the distance, but time had become a strange, elastic thing that stretched unbearably. Neighbors crowded around, some crying, some praying under their breath. My wife, Eileen, must have arrived at some point. I felt her hand on my shoulder, pressing gently, trying to keep me grounded. I caught a glimpse of tears in her eyes. She knew Wesley well, had shared many dinners and laughs with him and his wife, Carol. By the time the paramedics arrived, Wesley had not regained consciousness. They rushed in with a flurry of movement and equipment. Words like unresponsive, no pulse, and secondary drowning floated in the air, stabbing me with each syllable. I watched in numb horror as they placed an oxygen mask over Wesley's mouth, attached sensors to his chest, and started advanced life support. They worked tirelessly, hands moving in practiced efficiency, but their eyes flashed grimly. My heart hammered with the sense that time was slipping through our fingers. They loaded Wesley onto a stretcher, continuing chest compressions as they whisked him away to the ambulance. I blindly stumbled after them, wanting to be there to hold on to some shred of hope. The paramedic blocked me, kindly but firmly, telling me I had to wait. But they do all they could. I stood there, soaked in cold pool water, my arms blotched with bruises from Wesley's panicked grips, and felt the ground dissolve beneath me. Eileen draped a towel around my shoulders as the ambulance roared off, sirens blazing. Neighbors milled about, stunned, uncertain what to do next. The pool, with its bright turquoise water, glimmered with a harsh light. Everything looked so normal. The lounge chairs, the palms and planters, the sign reading "No running." Yet tragedy had struck in broad daylight. Slowly, as if pulled by a magnet, my eyes returned to that fence. Stark, unadorned, not a single life ring or rescue tube. The memory of Wesley's voice echoed. One day we might need that ring. My stomach twisted. How often had we all walked by that fence, ignoring the emptiness where safety gear was supposed to be? We'd grown accustomed to its absence, lulled into a false sense of security. Now we were paying a price so steep I couldn't begin to calculate. The minutes after the ambulance left blurred into a haze of frantic phone calls and hushed conversations. I called Carol, his wife, telling her that Wesley had an accident at the pool. My voice shook so badly I barely recognized it. She cried, confusion and shock mingling in her words. When I hung up, I sank onto a plastic lounge chair, burying my face in my hands. A part of me already knew, deep in my gut, that he might not make it. Another part of me prayed, with desperation I hadn't felt in years, that fate wouldn't be this cruel. Guilt throbbed in my chest. I asked myself 1,000 times if I could have saved him, if only I'd been faster, stronger, or more assertive in forcing the HOA to bring back the rings. Every scenario played out in my head, each ending with a single heartbreaking conclusion. We were powerless in that moment. And we shouldn't have been. Wesley did not survive. By the time the ambulance arrived at the hospital, attempts to revive him had failed. His heart never started beating on its own again. One of the paramedics told me privately, in a gentle but firm voice, he'd been without oxygen for too long. We did everything we could. I remember that moment as if it were etched in slow motion. The silence ringing in my ears, the acidic surge of disbelief clawing at my throat, and the hollow pang of grief lodging itself permanently inside my chest. Wesley's funeral was held on a muggy afternoon. Dark clouds threatened rain, fitting the solemn mood of the small service. Friends and family packed the modest chapel, weeping softly as pictures of Wesley in happier times flashed on a screen. There he was in uniform, smiling, a proud young man in the Air Force. There he was on a fishing trip, hoisting a massive salmon, eyes glinting with pride. And there he was at Sapphire Oaks, clowning around by the community pool, back when it still had life rings hanging on the fence. I stood with Eileen, tears burning my eyes. Every image felt like a stab of regret. Afterward, I decided I couldn't keep quiet. The guilt, the anger, both roared in me like a simmering volcano. Carol, Wesley's widow, was in shock, devastated. Their grown daughter flew in from Chicago, sobbing and demanding to know how this could have happened in such a supposedly safe, upscale neighborhood. I wanted answers, too. I wanted accountability. The tragic irony was that we had warned the HOA of the dangers. We had told them time and again. Now a man was dead, and no one could pretend it was just a theoretical risk. I called an emergency meeting at the community center, emailing every resident I knew, posting on the unofficial neighborhood Facebook page. By the time the meeting day arrived, the room was packed. Some faces looked guilty. They'd been the ones who'd shrugged off the decision to remove the life rings. Others were enraged, wanting the HOA board's head on a platter. The board members sat at a long table, looking uncomfortable, flipping through their documents. Their stance was defensive. "We deeply regret this tragedy," the HOA president said, reading from a typed statement. "Our thoughts and prayers go out to the family." I clenched my fists. I couldn't believe how rehearsed it sounded, like the politician's script that follows every disaster. He tried to pivot, mentioning something about individual responsibility and encouraging residents to practice water safety. But the crowd wasn't having it. One by one, neighbors stood up, demanding to know exactly why the life rings were gone, who made the decision, and whether they'd consider reinstating them immediately. A hush fell as I took the microphone. I didn't bother hiding my fury. I recounted the day, blow by agonizing blow, from Wesley's first sign of distress to the final, desperate struggle to keep him afloat. I described how we had no reliable flotation device to help us. My voice trembled with emotion as I declared, "We can't bring Wesley back, but we can damn well make sure nothing like this happens again." The board members glanced at one another. Finally, the HOA president said, "We'll look into the matter. We have to confer with our legal counsel." That phrase, legal counsel, enraged nearly everyone in the room. People started shouting, "This isn't a lawsuit. A man died. Put the rings back." The tension was so thick you could taste it. In the following days, a series of developments unfolded. The local news ran the story. HOA removes life rings, resident drowns. Reporters interviewed me and Carol, shining a harsh spotlight on Sapphire Oaks. The community's image as a pristine suburban haven took a beating. Public outcry was swift, with online forums calling for the board members to step down. Even state officials weighed in, referencing safety codes and liability concerns. Simultaneously, there was talk of a lawsuit. Carol, after consulting with her daughter, decided to file a wrongful death suit against the HOA. She asked if I would testify about the circumstances. I said yes, without hesitation. Inside, a small part of me was wary of the emotional toll a lawsuit might bring, but I knew this was bigger than my discomfort. It was about responsibility, about preventing more tragedies. Yet, as the legal wheels slowly began turning, the HOA finally capitulated. They quietly issued an update. Life rings and safety ropes were to be reinstalled within a week. By the end of the month, every community pool in Sapphire Oaks and in adjacent neighborhoods that looked to ours as an example would have the proper safety gear. It was a step forward, but it felt bittersweet and hollow, like winning a battle but losing the war. Wesley was gone. He'd never see the correction of the injustice he fought so hard against. The day they reinstalled the life rings, I stood at the edge of that same pool, tears threatening to spill. Bright orange floats hung on the chain-link fence, bobbing in the breeze as if beckoning the next potential victim of a cramp, a fainting spell, or simple panic in the deep end. It was a sight that should have been there all along. People patted my back, calling me brave for speaking out. But I didn't feel brave. I felt numb, haunted by the knowledge that it took losing Wesley, my friend, my confidant, to make the HOA realize the price of neglect. His funeral program was still tucked in my dresser drawer, a photograph of him smiling next to a note that read, "Your fight saved lives." I wished with all my heart that it could have saved his. In the weeks that followed, Sapphire Oaks underwent a quiet transformation. The once sealed lips of residents parted into candid discussions about other HOA policies, regulations that stifled individuality or undercut genuine neighborhood needs in favor of superficial aesthetics. People were no longer afraid to question the board's decisions. A neighbor who had once been fined for planting a small vegetable garden in her front yard now gained enough support to petition for new guidelines. Another resident, previously intimidated by repeated citations over a non-standard mailbox, garnered community backing to repeal the most restrictive parts of the bylaws. There were heated debates, but overshadowing all of it was the stark reality that it took a tragedy, a death, for us to start demanding our voices be heard. Wesley's legacy, folks started calling it. He had, in a tragic way, become a symbol of why communities should be governed by empathy, not bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Carol's lawsuit progressed. The HOA's legal team tried to settle out of court, citing sympathy for the unfortunate incident. Carol held her ground, and so did her daughter. They wanted a public acknowledgement of fault. They wanted an apology, not a lukewarm expression of regret. And they wanted the HOA to actively implement safety measures beyond just rehanging life rings, like training staff in CPR, posting emergency instructions, and conducting regular inspections to ensure the equipment remained functional. I was called upon to give a statement. Standing before a group of lawyers, I recounted every detail of that dreadful morning. The cross-examination was brutal at times, with the HOA's attorneys hinting that perhaps Wesley had pre-existing health conditions or that we failed to use alternative measures. The insinuation stung. I squared my shoulders and stated plainly that Wesley's drowning was a direct result of insufficient safety equipment, something the neighborhood had possessed before the board deemed it unsightly. Eventually, the HOA realized the court of public opinion was against them. If this case went to trial, their reputation, and possibly the personal finances of the board members would be on the line. They caved. The settlement included a sizable sum, which Carol donated in part to a national water safety organization. More importantly, it included a formal admission of responsibility and the adoption of Wesley's Rule, a policy ensuring that no homeowners association in the region affiliated with their parent management company could remove essential safety gear from communal facilities without proper alternatives in place. After months of tension, I felt a measure of closure. And yet, the ache of losing Wesley remained. It's a bruise on the soul that doesn't fade easily. I still saw him in the corners of my memories, in the pool, laughing with that easy grin, tossing a beach ball to his grandkids, talking about the best type of chlorine tablets to use. Sometimes I dreamed of that morning, his eyes wide, pleading, only to wake up soaked in sweat and heartbreak. On a warm Saturday, just when spring was beginning to tease us with the promise of renewal, Carol invited close friends and family to a small memorial by the pool. It wasn't a big, official event, just a gathering to share stories about Wesley and release wreaths of flowers onto the water. A few of us brought foldable chairs and sat in a semicircle, telling funny anecdotes or quiet reflections. As I looked around, I noticed the changes, bold and subtle alike. The fence was outfitted with a new life ring at every corner, and I saw small, strategically placed hooks for rescue poles. There were also laminated safety guidelines, a phone for emergencies, and even a sign encouraging anyone with concerns to contact the updated HOA leadership. That sign used to read, "Enjoy your swim." Now it read, "Your safety is our priority." Carol spoke softly to the group, her voice trembling yet determined. I want us to remember Wesley as someone who loved life, who believed in standing up for what's right. Even though we lost him, I think we gained a sense of purpose, to never let trivial rules overshadow human decency. She paused, gazing at the pool's still surface. He'd be proud of that. I nodded, tears gathering in the corners of my eyes. Eileen squeezed my hand. A hush fell over the small gathering as Carol approached the pool, dropping a wreath of white flowers onto the water. The petals spread out, floating gently, casting reflections in the late afternoon sun. For a moment, I felt Wesley there with us, in the hush of the breeze, in the soft murmur of the water. A few others placed their wreaths, and soon the pool was dotted with blossoms, white, yellow, pink. It looked like a gentle, sorrowful mosaic. Standing on the edge, I let my wreath slip from my fingers. The memories of that fateful day squeezed my chest, but I also felt a strange sense of calm. Wesley's story, our story, would serve as a warning and a testament that when we ignore basic safety for the sake of appearances, we risk losing far more than aesthetics can ever replace. After the memorial, neighbors lingered, sharing heartfelt hugs. Some headed to the community center for a modest reception. I stayed behind, taking a final long look at the water. Life had changed. My perspective, the neighborhood's rules, the balance of power between residents and the board. In a way, Wesley gave Sapphire Oaks a reason to re-examine itself, to challenge blind conformity. It was a heavy price, too heavy, but if change was to come, it would come with purpose. And so, I left the pool that day carrying both grief and resolve. I would honor Wesley's legacy by remembering that safety isn't a luxury. It's a fundamental responsibility, a responsibility we owe each other as neighbors, as friends, and as a community that values every life.